Thoughts arise in a person's mind, not always good ones, not always smart ones, but everyone has them, and that's normal. For example, what would happen if you found yourself in the epicenter of a fire? What do people feel when they're a second away from death? What would happen if a person regained consciousness during surgery? What do pathologists feel? But these are just thoughts, aren't they? One day, a teenager had an unusual dream. A dream to find out how many blows with a stone it would take to kill a person. Unfortunately, the boy decided to turn his dream into reality, and his dark thoughts transformed into a true nightmare. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. Imagine you're sitting in cozy pajamas in your own home, all alone, leisurely scrolling through the internet. A steaming cup of tea sits on the table, with a plate of appetizing cookies nearby. You're looking forward to how you'll spend the day. Suddenly, a barely audible rustle comes from behind you. Panic grips you. You're alone at home. You cautiously turn your head, your heart skips a beat, then starts pounding twice as fast, because standing right behind you is a person dressed in all black, their face hidden under a mask, clutching a stone in their hand. They didn't come by chance. They came to make their dream a reality, to take your life. The serene picture of suburban life was brutally shattered when Pamela Vitale, radiating kindness and positivity, was found savagely beaten in her home. Her life, full of achievements and love, was unjustly cut short by a cruel crime that not only devastated her loved ones, but also shocked the entire community. This story began on the evening of October 15th, 2005, in the prestigious suburb of Lafayette, located about 30 kilometers east of San Francisco. That day, a man named Daniel Horowitz returned home after a long workday, not quite home, but to his property. Daniel and his wife Pamela were in the process of building their dream mansion. It was to be an estate atop a hill in Hanner Canyon. Pamela oversaw the entire project, drawing up plans for the workers, designing the layout, and choosing materials. Since the house itself was still under construction, the couple lived on the same property in a 2-story trailer. So Daniel Horowitz pulled up to their residence at 6 p.m. and immediately noticed that his wife's car was parked outside. This was strange because she had planned to attend a ballet that evening, but apparently, for some reason, she changed her plans. The man opened the trunk, grabbed the grocery bags, and headed toward the front door, but froze in his tracks. A pool of blood was spreading across the porch outside the trailer. Daniel realized something terrible had happened. As soon as he pushed the door open, his worst fears were confirmed. His wife Pamela, covered in blood, lay on the floor in a fetal position, almost at the very exit. Although it was clear at first glance that the woman was dead, Daniel couldn't help but check. Clinging to a faint spark of hope, he bent over her body and tried to find a pulse. Her heart wasn't beating. Of course, Daniel hadn't expected to come home to such a horrific scene, though Horowitz sometimes encountered similar things in his line of work. In that moment, he was terrified, panicked, and immediately called 911. While speaking with the dispatcher, he finally realized that Pamela was gone. He sank to his knees beside her and began saying things he rarely said in life. Daniel sobbed and whispered how much he loved her. He asked who would now live in their dream house. He was furious, unable to comprehend who could have done this to his wife. He wept and shouted, "No, Pamela, no!" And that heart-wrenching cry echoed through the canyon. People who heard it said that in that moment, Daniel sounded like a wounded animal. Pamela Vitale Horowitz was born on January 11, 1953 in Texas, but spent much of her youth in Minneapolis. Her loved ones described her as the kindest, most generous, and most selfless woman. She met her first husband, Mario, in London while working as a flight attendant. They started dating, then married, and had 2 children, a son, Mario Jr., and a daughter, Marisa. Unfortunately, over time, their relationship fell apart, and the couple divorced. Pamela, left alone with 2 children, wasn't going to mourn her failed marriage. She decided to start life anew, and in 1978, she packed all the essentials into the trunk, put the kids in the car, and drove to California. Pamela had no concrete plans for the future. She just wanted a change of scenery to see what would come of it. While in California, Pamela got a job as an accountant, then studied filmmaking at the University of California, Los Angeles, and completed an internship that allowed her to become an independent producer. As she began her career as a producer, Pamela met Daniel Horowitz through her sister. This was 12 years before her death. Daniel was a lawyer and once decided to try his hand at writing. He was working on a case that he later wanted to turn into a film script. While looking for a producer, he met Pamela Vitale through mutual friends. From that first meeting, when Daniel saw this woman, he stopped thinking about the script and thought only of her. Sometime later, they married. By 2005, the Horowitz family was quite successful financially. Daniel became a well-known lawyer and legal expert. He often appeared on various cable news channels as a legal commentator on high-profile cases, making him well known to the public. Pamela worked for a while as an executive at Infomix, but later began assisting Daniel at his law firm. The Horowitzes were not just husband and wife, they were best friends. As one friend put it, others could only dream of such a relationship. The Horowitzes were a strong couple. Everything was going well for them. They loved each other, were building their dream home, and planned to grow old together. But someone decided that Pamela had lived long enough in this world. On Saturday morning, October 15th, 2005, 52-year-old Pamela Vitale was working at home on her computer. She was dressed casually in a long t-shirt and slippers. It was a perfectly ordinary morning. She brewed herself some tea and placed it on the table nearby. Around 11 a.m., she heard a noise behind her, turned, and nearly collided with a person in a mask. She immediately realized the stranger had come with ill intentions when she saw the sharp stone in their hand. Pamela tried to run. She rushed toward the trailer's exit, but her pursuer caught up and tried to knock her down. She fell onto a large television screen, pushing it several meters. By this time, she was already bleeding heavily. A red mark was left on the TV, and near the front door, blood was smeared, with a footprint near the door handle. It seemed Pamela had tried to kick the door open to call for help, but she wasn't given the chance. The attack continued. The assailant and the trailer's occupant engaged in an unequal struggle. Pamela fought for her life until the very end. Her foot bore not only her blood, but also the blood of the attacker. Apparently, at some point, she managed to strike him hard and cause pain. Despite Pamela striking his face and resisting with all her strength, she was ultimately beaten unconscious. Her nose was broken, several teeth were knocked out, and her skull was so severely fractured that it caused internal bleeding. Her scalp was nearly torn off, and then, when Pamela could no longer move, her stomach was slashed open, she was turned over, and an unknown symbol was carved into her back. After the assault, the attacker remained in the trailer for a significant period. It would have taken just 5 minutes to take the woman's life. The assailant was in no hurry, likely knowing no one would show up for hours. He calmly drank a glass of water, then took a shower. His bloody traces and fingerprints were found in Pamela's bathroom, as well as on the counter and the glass of water. After cleaning himself up, the attacker disemboweled her stomach and carved that strange symbol on the homeowner's back. Then he walked around the trailer and finally left the house, leaving Pamela to die alone. This was the timeline of events investigators pieced together after examining the crime scene and the woman's body. Detectives meticulously reconstructed Pamela's final hours, searching for clues among mundane details. Experts were able to collect DNA from the sole of the victim's foot and from under her toenails. While Pamela was being killed, her husband Daniel was preparing for a court case. Ironically, he was working on a case involving a woman who had killed her romantic partner and then claimed self-defense. He later withdrew from the case because he was grieving for his untimely departed wife. But in any case, he had an alibi for the time of the crime, so it wasn't hard for the police to verify. That day, Daniel left the house around 8 a.m. During his lunch break, he called Pamela, but she didn't pick up. This wasn't unusual, as his wife often spent time outside, leaving her phone at home. After finishing his work, he bought groceries and headed home, where he stumbled upon his wife's lifeless body. As soon as Daniel called the police, reporters and curious onlookers appeared at the house in no time. Everyone was discussing the same questions. What happened? Who sent Pamela Vitale to the other side? Could her lawyer husband have orchestrated the attack, since in many cases when a woman dies, her partner is responsible? The situation did look suspicious. How did the attacker get into the trailer? Perhaps Pamela let him in herself, meaning it was someone she knew well. It's unlikely she would have walked around in just a t-shirt in front of a stranger. The attack was deeply personal. A random person simply wouldn't have had a motive, as there was no robbery or sexual assault. Nevertheless, the police ruled Daniel Horowitz out of the suspect list because he had an alibi. He bore no direct responsibility, but Daniel was a lawyer, and the attack on his wife could have been connected to his work. Perhaps one of his dissatisfied clients or their relatives attacked his wife to hurt him or get revenge. Then investigators turned their attention to a neighbor with whom the Horowitz family had strained relations. Daniel had even considered filing a restraining order against this person, but the issue was later resolved peacefully. The neighbors managed to bury the hatchet, so this person was also ruled out as a suspect. While the police followed these leads, Pamela's friends and loved ones had to say their final goodbyes. They held a private memorial service in a memorial park. It was on that day of mourning and remembrance that the sheriff called a press conference to make a statement. The police made an arrest on October 20th, 2005, 5 days after the attack. The detained individual was only 16 years old, turning 17 in 2 weeks. The young man's name was Scott Dyleski, and he was indirectly acquainted with the Horowitz couple. Daniel, as a lawyer, had helped Scott's family with some legal matters. Scott Edgar Dleski was born in San Francisco, California in 1988, and, as people said, he didn't have the best childhood. His parents divorced a couple of years after his birth. The boy stayed with his mother, Esther, who faced significant financial difficulties. For a short period, Scott had a stepfather. However, he couldn't get along with Scott's mother, and the woman found herself in a difficult situation again. Apparently, Esther wasn't a very good mother, as Scott's biological father twice contacted a child protection agency, asking them to take action regarding his ex-wife. He described her as neglectful, emotionally unstable, and at times even aggressive. But no specific measures were taken regarding this request. However, it's not entirely fair to judge a woman left alone with a child and struggling financially while Scott's father lived in his own house and had a stable job. What stopped him from taking his son and raising him? So both the mother and father failed to give their son proper attention and were equally to blame for him straying from the right path. Once again left without support, Esther, Scott's mother, turned to friends who owned a plot of land down the hill from where Daniel and Pamela lived. Esther's friends were also building a house and living in a trailer, but they took pity on the desperate woman and allowed her and her son to stay in a cabin on their property for a while. The cabin was entirely unfit for living. There was no bathroom or kitchen, but they had no choice. Besides, it was a temporary solution. Esther still didn't have money to rent proper housing, so she and her son settled on their friend's property until they finished building their house. Despite all the hardships he faced in childhood, Scott Dyleski grew up as a good kid. He was a Boy Scout, played sports, and when it came to school, he did fairly well academically. That was until he became a teenager. The teenage years are one of the most unpredictable periods in anyone's life. But in Scott's life, a tragic event occurred that deeply affected his worldview. His sister died in a car accident, and she wasn't the only person in the car who succumbed to injuries. Their car was hit by a driver who had intended to take his own life. As a result, he sent several innocent people to their deaths, but survived himself. This incredibly traumatic event caused significant damage to Dleski's fragile psyche. From an ordinary cheerful boy, Scott turned into a gloomy, withdrawn teenager overnight. He began avoiding people and became fascinated with goth culture. He dyed his dark brown hair black, started wearing black clothing and a long coat, and developed a fascination with stories about serial killers. Those who knew Dleski said he seemed more like a harmless eccentric than a dangerous goth. However, despite his unusual appearance, most people considered Scott a kind, gentle, and tender kid. He might dress strangely, listen to more aggressive music than other teens, or have unconventional hobbies, but Dleski rarely got into trouble. He voluntarily helped and cared for people, unlike most other teenagers. He didn't even wear leather because he loved animals. That's how neighbors and teachers saw him. But sometimes, some people love animals while hating humans. In reality, Scott was a teenager filled with negative, sometimes dangerous fantasies. This was reflected in his drawings and writings, where he practically cried out for help, but his cries went unheard. In one essay titled "Living for Slaughter," Dleski wrote that he was raised in hatred and would now hate because he lived to take someone's life. According to Scott himself, he tried marijuana at 11 and later experimented with various illegal substances to see their effects. But his mother insisted she never saw her son drunk or under the influence of drugs. So it's possible the boy was just trying to make himself seem tougher to the police and made up stories. During his teenage years, Scott stopped caring about school. He dropped out, hoping to later pass exams and enroll in college to take art courses. But he never followed through. The most alarming sign was what he searched for on his computer: practices of dissecting animal and human bodies for organ harvesting. This single interest revealed more about the teenager's inner world than his outward appearance. In 2005, Scott and his friend decided to start selling marijuana to make money. They planned to set up a small grow operation in a closet in Scott's room, equipping it with lighting. But growing plants required special equipment, which cost money they didn't have. Since the area they lived in was fairly affluent, the teens decided to break into homes and steal not cash or bank cards, but confidential information to fund their small business later. They simply copied card details from bills to make online purchases. Their first priority was special grow lights. Scott placed an order using a stolen credit card, but mistakenly listed 2 different addresses for billing and shipping. The lighting equipment company refused to process the order, suspecting fraud. Soon, a woman called the police, reporting that her credit card information had been stolen. She checked her statement and saw a purchase she hadn't made. According to the statement, someone had ordered special grow lights to a neighboring house. Strangely, the billing address was the home of a woman named Esther, while the shipping address was her neighbor Pamela Vitale's house. The woman spoke with both ladies, but neither had any idea what was going on. Esther returned home and, just to be safe, checked her son's computer. All the data had been wiped, and she immediately realized Scott had something to do with the credit card scheme. After much questioning, the boy admitted he had broken into a house and copied credit card information. But he wasn't alone. Scott immediately turned in his friend. Instead of going to the police to resolve the situation, Esther told her son to get rid of the evidence. Then she called the parents of Scott's friend and told them everything so they could talk to their son. In the end, Scott's friend confessed to his parents not only about the credit card scheme, but also that Dleski had planned to kill Pamela Vitale. After such a confession, the friend's parents couldn't stand by and went to the police station with their son. Scott's friend admitted they often discussed various methods of killing. Dleski believed beating someone with a club would be best. Though it would take longer, it would be more painful for the victim. After all, a gunshot would kill someone instantly, and they wouldn't realize they were dying. After telling the detectives everything, the boy received immunity, meaning he wouldn't be held accountable as an accomplice. Investigators immediately went to the Dleski home to arrest Scott. But Scott wasn't home. His mother, Esther, insisted to the officers that she didn't know where her son was. After hours of questioning, Esther finally confessed where Scott was hiding. They found and arrested him. 53-year-old Esther was also taken into custody for destroying evidence. A backpack containing a hard drive with information about accounts and numbers of people Scott had stolen from. One of the names was Pamela Vitale's. To get rid of the evidence, Esther simply burned it. Detectives also learned that Scott wasn't home during the attack on Pamela. That evening, his mother called his cell phone and told him to stay away because the area was crawling with police. Ultimately, the charges against Esther were dropped once she agreed to cooperate with the investigation and provide truthful testimony. For the woman who had turned 50, her grown son was the meaning of her life. Esther lived for Scott and did everything to protect him, even though she knew she was breaking the law. Perhaps realizing she had acted wrongly or fearing she would face trial herself, she told the detectives about the backpack and some of the items in it. Then Esther handed over blood-stained boots, a glove, and other clothing splattered with dark stains. These were substantial pieces of evidence and played a significant role in the case. Esther herself tried to convince the police that she didn't realize she was helping her son hide serious evidence related to Pamela Vitale's murder. She thought it was just related to the credit card fraud. After Scott's arrest, they found several sheets of paper hidden in his dresser. In Dleski's handwriting, as established, information about various people's accounts was written. Among the papers was one that caused the most concern: a handwritten plan for kidnapping someone. It stated that the victim should first be knocked out, then held captive. Then certain conditions should be met, evidence destroyed, and possibly the captive killed. The trial dragged on. Initially, Scott was represented by attorney Thomas McKenna, whom Scott later asked to be removed from the case. It turned out that this lawyer had defended the driver responsible for the 2002 car accident that killed Scott's sister and others in the car. Dleski had to hire a new defense attorney. By the time the trial finally began, Scott looked entirely different. He did his best to change his appearance, becoming much neater. He wore a starched shirt, and his long hair was cut short. The goal of these changes was to present him to the jury as an innocent teenager who wouldn't hurt a fly. This was the defense's tactic, as Scott genuinely didn't plead guilty. Though there was plenty of evidence against Dleski in this case, one piece was the most critical: Scott's blood on the victim's foot. As mentioned earlier, Pamela fought desperately for her life and struck her attacker in the face with her foot several times, breaking his nose. On October 15, 2005, Scott woke up early and went for a walk, as he claimed, to see a waterfall near the house, then return home, shower, and visit his girlfriend. But the so-called walk went wrong from the start, as he came home battered. It was immediately clear he had been struck in the face multiple times. There was a cut on Scott's nose that was bleeding, and his nose was swollen. A fresh bruise was forming under his eye, and his wrist was sore. It seemed like a sprain. At home, Dleski said he got these injuries during the walk. By the way, the marks on his face and body were still visible when he was arrested. The young man told his mother and housemates an incredible story about how he set out in high spirits to admire the waterfall. Everything was fine until a frantic, clearly frightened woman blocked his path. She grabbed his arm, scratching him, and started saying something, repeating the same phrase over and over. She shouted, "I can't believe this is really happening." When the young man tried to break free, she punched him in the face, then started slapping him so hard that his nose bled. It's unclear how Scott's family reacted to this, but a few days after the attack on Pamela Vitale, Dleski confessed to a friend that the woman he met during that walk was Pamela. Now he feared the police would question him about her murder because his DNA might be at the crime scene. After all, the crazy neighbor had scratched his face, and bits of his skin could be under her nails. Undoubtedly, he was right. His DNA was indeed found at the scene, not only in the blood trail, but also on Pamela's foot. The examination confirmed that the foot had not only the victim's blood, but also the attacker's. The DNA matched Dleski's. Additionally, on the clothing his mother turned over, boots, a black glove, a navy ski mask, and a black t-shirt. They found blood belonging to Pamela Vitale. Another piece of evidence was the symbol carved on the back of the deceased woman. Scott used a similar symbol to sign his dark writings. The only thing investigators couldn't determine was the real motive for the crime, though the prosecution doesn't necessarily need to prove motive. But its presence would have clarified the defendant's intentions to the jury and helped them make the right decision. Establishing the motive behind such a barbaric act was as difficult as it was important. At Scott Dyleski's trial, various hypotheses clashed, from the defendant's mental disorder to the mistaken identification of the victim. The forensic examination became a silent witness to Pamela's final moments, while psychological studies tried to penetrate Scott's mind. Both the prosecution and defense used various theories to unravel the complex web of motives that drove the young man to murder. The defense capitalized on the lack of motive, arguing that Scott didn't do it because he simply had no reason to. When the killer was taking Pamela's life, the teenager was at home, meaning someone else was responsible for the murder. As evidence, the defense pointed out that in addition to Pamela's and Dleski's DNA, an unidentified person's DNA was also found, but this didn't sway the jury. Dleski's behavior and actions were compared to notorious killers like John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and Scott Peterson. Like them, the boy wore a mask of a happy person, hiding all that darkness inside. Even the judge said Scott tried to follow in the footsteps of his hero, Jack the Ripper, because he was fascinated by what was inside the human body. After 18 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on the now 17-year-old Scott Dyleski. He was found guilty of first-degree murder against Pamela Vitale, and since he was only 16 at the time of the crime, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Due to the defendant's age, the death penalty wasn't considered. Pamela's husband, Daniel Horowitz, a lawyer, had represented about 50 different criminals in his career. They were all far from the best representatives of humanity. Each had some reason to take another person's life, but Scott Dyleski simply enjoyed taking lives, striking blows, and reveling in the result. This teenager was the only one who showed absolutely no remorse. But what can you do when Scott lacked proper parental upbringing? His mother, Esther, who initially hid physical evidence and then turned it over to the police, insisting she didn't understand its significance, saw Pamela's daughter, Marisa, at the trial. She began crying because the young woman was the spitting image of her deceased mother. The question immediately arose: did Esther truly know what her son had done and, by hiding the blood-stained clothes, want to help him? But then, when backed into a corner, she changed her mind and began cooperating with the investigation. Now Esther will long be haunted by Pamela Vitale's final moments, running through the trailer hoping to escape, and her own son Scott, striking blow after blow on the innocent woman's body. Is the mother to blame for her son's upbringing? Most likely, seeing a quiet, calm child, Esther had no idea what horrific fantasies were brewing in his mind. The only time Scott showed any emotion at the trial was during the display of autopsy photos. He leaned forward, his mouth open in astonishment. Dleski was clearly admiring his work, what he had done to poor Pamela. After the verdict was delivered, Scott was returned to a juvenile facility, where he remained until he turned 18, then transferred to prison. Dleski filed several appeals against his sentence, claiming his rights were violated, but all appeals were denied. Although Scott was initially sentenced to life without parole, in 2018, his sentence was reduced to 25 years in prison after California passed a new law. This gave juveniles sentenced to life without parole a chance at release in the future. So now Scott could be released in 2030. In prison, Dleski has been a model inmate. He managed to earn a college degree and is now simply waiting for the opportunity to apply for parole. But the inmate's good behavior won't help Pamela's family and close friends cope with the fact that they'll have to live the rest of their lives without her. Daniel Horowitz never moved into the dream mansion he planned to share with his wife. In the end, he sold the land along with the partially built house and tried to move on as best he could, but he'll still have to spend his old age without the woman he loved, around whom all his hopes and dreams were built. And all because of a cruel boy who lived nearby and dreamed of finding out how many blows with a stone it would take to kill a person. So should we fear our bad thoughts or desires? After all, sooner or later, they have a way of coming true. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.